Ashish, you're going to start something now or after 9 o'clock?
Yeah, we'll start at 10 o'clock sharp.
Okay. Arjun, it is getting recorded?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine, thank you. So this video should be there or should I minimize it?
You can minimize it. Good morning, viewers. So in this series of knowledge empowerment by Hiregang Academy, wherein till 14th we are going to discuss on various important aspects of GST and the various, I would say, practical challenges what could arise in terms of GST law. Today we are going to discuss on the levy and supply provisions of GST. And for discussion on this session, we have CA Rajesh Kumar TR with us, who has been heading the litigation wing of Hiregang and Associates. Presently, the topic what we are going to cover today is the levy and supply, which will basically include fundamental of taxation system, then thereafter followed by understanding GST system in India, then levy related provision, supply related provisions, various issues what could arise in the interpretation of the supply and levy, followed by question answer of the participants any. So before we move on to start the session, my request from all the attendees, all the participants is any question, whatever you have, on your screen, you will be able to see separate uh, panel for chatting system and Q&A session, Q&A. So any question, whatever you have, all the questions should be posted in Q&A instead of in the chat system. We will attempt to cover the question in the end of the session. If the number of questions are more than to be taken in the given time frame, probably in the end, we will have a separate webcast for answering the pending questions, or the answer to those questions would be emailed to the participants. But we will attempt our best to cover as much question as possible. So with this, I hand over the proceeding for the day to CA Rajesh Kumar TR. Yes, sir, you can proceed.
Thanks, Ashish, for the introduction and effectively starting off the session. The topic which is assigned to me is to cover levy and supply related aspects and some of the possible issues which I can address. Firstly, I would like to thank Hiregang Academy for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts, views, and little of knowledge in this area to a lot of participants in this webinar. Before I go into the aspect of levy and supply, I thought it appropriate that I discuss for some time relating to fundamentals, which is very much necessary for somebody to understand this GST law thoroughly and deeper into it.
Sir, in between, just to interrupt, whether your video is enabled or is it click on the start video is disabled?
Now it is showing on.
Okay, because some of the participants have mentioned, one participant, that it is not.
Now it is visible, but at least I am seeing my video.
Yeah, you can proceed, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, as I was trying to talk about the fundamentals, the first issue which I thought I would discuss is the tax what we are talking about, the GST, the scope of the parliament and state legislature to levy taxes on the same. In that direction, firstly, if you have to see the definition of a tax, as per the Constitution of India, though the tax is not directly explained, the taxation is explained or rather defined, and accordingly it is said that tax shall be considered accordingly. As you can see on the screen, the taxation is imposition of any tax or impost. So if somebody looks at it carefully, it is not only a tax, it is also covering imposed. Imposed mean imposition, which is a compulsory levy. So does not mean that once we are talking about tax, it only includes tax. It also includes any other levy which is compulsorily extracted. It may be called a cess, surcharge, as well as fee. In fact, there may be a lot of debates which may be happening whether the fees can be subjected to GST. I think that is one more topic in itself which somebody can really dwell upon. The reason why I'm saying that is the distinction as to the fee vis-a-vis a tax is presently a subject matter of a dispute presently pending before the 10-member Constitution Bench of Supreme Court. Meanwhile, what is the essence of the tax has already been dealt by number of decisions. Here, we have to understand that any state who is having a sovereignty, the power to levy taxes comes inherently for that state as a sovereign state. However, in India, the constitutional provisions has subjected that sovereignty as to what extent the taxes can be levied. So effectively, any tax which has to be imposed, it should be within the framework of the constitutional provisions and it cannot go beyond. Now, the next aspect which I want to emphasize is merely by the fact that the Constitution has given a power to levy tax, the executive, that is the government authorities, cannot go straight away and collect taxes. There is an intermittent action which is essential, that is a statute. So if we refer to Article 265, it does mention about no tax shall be levied or collected without authority of law. Authority of law, that law can be through parliament or through legislature. So if you have to see here, there are three things coming out. Firstly, the power to levy tax originating from the Constitution. Then that consequent to that, a statute or a law is made by the state or the parliament, and consequent to the statute made, the authorities, the executives, will get a power to go and collect the tax. So this is how the mechanism works. Now, just I thought it appropriate that, the definition of tax, one of the decisions of Honorable Supreme Court as early as 1958 itself has tried to explain what a tax is. So I've just given information. You can refer the presentation. Only the first bullet point I will talk about, so that covers the rest of the things in itself. So tax is nothing but a compulsory extraction of money by public authority for public purposes enforceable by law and is not a payment for services rendered. So the aspect of service vis-a-vis without service. One is what I spoke earlier, compulsory extraction. The tax under the Constitution even includes impost. Whereas here, when we are talking about whatever the nomenclature it may be called as, if it is in the nature of compulsory extraction and it is not for any specific services provided, then it can be constituted to be a tax. So if there is again, there are various further principles which are discussed in this decision and subsequent decisions, distinguishing what is the fees from the taxes. So if anybody is interested, they can refer to this decision, subsequent development after this decision. Generally, whenever I speak about taxation, I always try to cover these basic slide. For any taxes, there is a requirement of 3 elements, that is, or 3 stages. Firstly, a levy or a charge. Next is an assessment, and the third is a collection. The levy will make any person liable to pay tax. On the other hand, it gives a right for the authorities, executives, to go and collect taxes. It's a power to collect tax. So an action or a situation or an event which will make a person liable to pay tax, a taxable event has occurred. Once the taxable event or the charging section is attracted, then a person is said to be liable to pay tax or leviable to tax. The next question which comes in is, once a person is leviable to pay tax, what is the quantum of tax which he is supposed to pay? That is where the assessment comes into picture. Assessment is a quantification of the levy being imposed. So when I'm talking about assessment, the assessment majorly now it is a self-assessment where the person who is liable to pay tax is required to assess a tax himself and pay to the government. However, until recently in the customs, the assessment was being done by the customs officer. Even there, now essentially it is made on a self-assessment basis. Now, what are all the aspects which we need to be aware of while we are quantifying the tax? One, obviously, we need to know the value of the goods. We need to know the rate of tax. And the next question which comes in, or which is generally asked, is whether an exemption, is it a part of a assessment stage or is it a part of a levy stage or a charging stage? Once a levy is attracted, then through a delegated legislation, the governments come out and issue notifications exempting some portion of it or the entire thing, whether unconditionally or with conditions, exempted from payment of tax. So thereby, it is merely a relaxation from payment of tax. So effectively, the exemption comes as a part of an assessment mechanism. So wherein we need to have a value, we need to determine the rate of tax, apply it, and also see whether any exemptions are applicable and reduce or give a relaxation to that effect and compute the net tax payable. The third stage, once the tax is liable to be paid and quantified, then the next phase, how it is to be paid. That is when the collection mechanism, the manner in which the taxes has to be remitted. If it is not remitted, how the authorities is empowered to go and collect the taxes. These are all comes as a part of the collection mechanism. Generally, if you see any taxing statute, even the manner in which the provisions would have got arranged would be in the similar thing. Generally, the extent and scope, I mean, the title and extent will be there. Then there will be definitions. After that, mainly the charging sections will be there. Sometimes there may be an administrative sections in before that. Then there will be assessment related provisions. Then there will be collection or the payment related provisions will be there. So this is how it is there. So when we are reading a provision, we can read it in that context for a better understanding of any statutory provision. Now, I have put one point at the end. Goods and services tax, the GST, is indirect tax. What do we mean by indirect tax? Indirect tax is a tax wherein the person liable to pay tax or an assessee is expected to collect from the recipient or the customer and pay to government. I use the word expected. It is not that if somebody is not able to collect, he is relieved from his obligation to pay tax. Whether he collects or not, he is obligated to pay tax to the government. So this gives one more proposition that the aspect of who has to bear the incidence of tax, whether the supplier or the recipient is dependent upon the contractual obligation between the parties. The GST law or any taxing statute will generally not guide it. Who will guide this aspect? What will guide this aspect is the contractual obligation, but the primary responsibility of paying a taxes to the government will always be on the person liable to pay tax as per the statute. The next aspect which I wanted to also emphasize is goods and service tax is a consumption-based destination tax. What it implies, it may not have much of a issues when for the person who is liable to pay tax. It is more for a person who has to understand the way the law functions, one, and at the same time, it is more important for the governments, because who is going to enjoy the taxes being paid by the citizen? Unlike erstwhile sales tax law, which was origin based, if a goods are sold, say from Karnataka to Maharashtra, and it is consumed over there, the tax was being paid by the seller or a dealer in Karnataka, and the Karnataka government was entitled to receive the tax and enjoy it, and it is free to spend for its purposes. Whereas in the GST regime, the Maharashtra will be entitled to receive that particular tax, though wherever it is deposited. The ultimate beneficiary of that particular tax would be Maharashtra, and it will go into the exchequer of Maharashtra, and they are entitled to utilize that tax for their purposes. This is as far as the state share is concerned. There's another thing which is a central share, that is again will go to consolidated fund and get distributed to all the states as per the Finance Commission's recommendation. So that is another aspect of it. We are not getting it. Just why I'm explaining this is for my future discussion, this basic understanding is very much important. In fact, I also felt it appropriate. I need to bring in to your knowledge the decision of Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Govind Saran Gangasaran, where it lays down that for any taxing statute to be valid, 4 aspects should be clear in the taxing statute. 1, the taxable event attracting a levy and the nature should be clear. The person on whom the levy is imposed and who is obligated to pay tax should be coming out clearly. The rate of tax which is imposed should be clear, and at the same time, the measure, the value on which the rate has to be applied should also be clear. Only when all these 4 components are clearly brought out in the statute, we can consider that the statute for levying taxes is valid. Keeping this in mind, if you see the charging section, more or less all these aspects have been complied with. This is just for information I'm just sharing as a fundamental thing. Now I move on to the goods and service tax. Before I get into levy and supply, it is very important for us to understand how this entire understanding of this law has to be, or the arrangement or the way it is designed has to be understood, so that it becomes easier for us to, when we go further and interpret the provisions, we are easy to understand. As we all know, India is a federal country with a center and state structure. However, the Constitution had clearly demarcated the powers to levy taxes. Which all the taxes will be levied and collected by state, center, levied by center, collected by state, or vice versa, were all clearly set out in the Constitution. Now, once they went ahead to introduce the goods and services tax, the understanding was, as far as the businessman is concerned, as far as the citizen is concerned who is liable to pay tax, this tax should appear as a one tax. But constitutionally, there was a lot of challenge for that, because the power to levy tax, as I told in the beginning, once you're recognizing a sovereignty of a state as well as center, you cannot take away the power of levying taxes so easily. And in fact, it can be said to be a basic structure of our constitution which cannot be disturbed. So in order to keep that aspect going, at the same time, for the assessees to make it appear that it is one tax, lot of thought process has gone into it and have designed this entire taxing structure. Now they have tried to see that there are multiple taxes, but they operate in coordination, they work in tandem, and effectively there is a cross adjustment, cross utilization permissible, subject to the limitation which they have within the framework of the GST. As we all know, as far as the interstate supply is concerned, it is the center through IGST, whereas central tax as well as state tax are concerned, it is a combination of state and central coming and levying the taxes through CGST Act, SGST Act. In case of union territories, the UTGST Act. We need to understand that though we call goods and services tax as one, but it is governed by different statutes, and independently we have to examine which of the statute is applicable to the concerned situation and which provision of that needs to be applied. In fact, when somebody looks into the 101 Constitutional Amendment Act, there is a reference of interstate supply, where the principles of defining what is a supply in the course of interstate trade or commerce is through a statute by Parliament. So effectively, Parliament is going to define when a supply will be treated as an intrastate or an interstate. So that is the reason, if you see the principles of when it will be interstate or intrastate is defined by a Parliament in IGST Act. It is not defined in the CGST Act. Similarly, place of supply is also defined in IGST Act. The central goods and service tax is governed by Central GST Act. State GST Act, respective states have enacted their respective GST Acts. Both these acts are more or less mirror image and go hand in hand together, though for the purpose of administration, either of them will administrate. And both the authorities, central and state, have been given power to administer the other statute as well. So they're empowered to administer both these statutes together. When it comes to union territories is passed, the act is passed by the Parliament for applying for all the union territories in place of a state GST Act. Again, there is a Compensation Cess Act. If you see, in order to avoid the duplication anomaly, all the definitions and basic structure is covered under the CGST Act or the SGST Act. However, all these acts work together and work in tandem. Now, when it comes to the territory, Article 240 of the Constitution do mention that Parliament is empowered to make law for whole of India. or any part of whole of India. Similarly, state legislature is empowered to make law for whole or part of that state. At the same time, it's also said that no law made by the parliament is invalid on an extraterritorial operation. Why I may brought out this is there may be a situation where, by virtue of a deeming fiction, certain supplies are being taxed in India, though somebody may think that it is actually happening outside the country of India. So it cannot be challenged as having extraterritorial operation, because that is why the international related things are all covered by IGST, where the statute is made by the parliament, and state legislature will not come into picture for any of those transactions which is relating to international transactions. Now, when it comes to the taxation under the GST law, unlike central excise or the service tax law, the entire country is not construed as a one unit of assessment, one unit of taxation territory. On the other hand, in the GST, each state is considered to be a one unit of taxable territory. Unless we go with this understanding, we may go wrong in understanding many of the provisions which may come across later. So in other words, the basic tax territory or the unit of the taxable territory is a state, whereas center is concerned, it's only a consolidation of all these things, or when it happens between intra territory of these states or the union territories, then only the union comes into picture. Otherwise, it is the state or the union territory which will become a territorial concept under the GST law. It is very important for us to understand when we are reading the CGST Act. Though in the beginning it mentions that it applies to whole of India, actually when it comes to the application, it is no doubt applicable to whole of country, the same act, but when you are applying it, you have to apply it to the respective state in which the supply has happened, because CGST Act applies only for an intrastate supply, and that intrastate supply, whichever from where that supply has happened, that you have to construe that act as the act applicable for that state in relation to that transaction. Then only we can understand this act better. For example, you may say that once there is a CGST Act, once a input tax is accrued in one state, where is the restriction for me to utilize that credit in some other state? The answer to that is what I just now explained. You have to apply this for that particular unit of taxable territory separately, though the code is same, but application is on that particular taxable territory, along with which state's tax statute you are applying this. So if you go with this understanding, then it becomes easier for understanding many other aspects, like the concept of distinct person. Why is the concept of distinct person? Because each state is a separate taxable territory. Now, if a person is having his presence in more than one taxable territory, for the purpose of taxing statute, it is deemed that that person's location or establishment in that other state is to be treated as a separate independent person, because it's a separate taxable territory in itself. Once it's a separate taxable territory, you cannot construe it as a one territory and give a treatment. Therefore, in order to give effect to the concept of this territory, a taxable territory based on states or union territory, we have to go on to do many adjustments required. That is where this concept of distinct person and supply between the states, all those things comes into picture. Now, I think I can move on to the core topic with the basic understanding or the explanation which I gave. The levy section under the CGST Act as well as the respective state SGST Act, there is section 9(1). I am not covering the further provisions of 9(3), 9(4), etc. because there is a separate session on RCM and all where it may be taken up and dealt. So I'm only going to focus on 9(1) essentially. Now, in the course of which I may just make reference to 9(3), 9(4), and 9(5) to some extent to give some basic understanding about it. As far as this levy is concerned, it is the tax levied on all intra-state supplies. There is a supply. Again, what is intra-state supply? The definition is given in IGST Act. We have to refer to the IGST Act, understand the meaning and scope of the term intra-state supply, and if the transaction happens to be intra-state supply, then we come to this statute and try to see which of this provision is applicable and which notification is applicable in this context. So it is all intra-state supplies. And what is the supply? It's supply of goods or services or both. So it may be a goods per se or services per se or a combination of goods or services. Though in many of the places we see this phrase, goods or services or both, but in other parts of this statute, it is a necessity that all the transaction should be grouped into either a supply of goods or supply of services, otherwise of which we cannot proceed further as to any of the aspects which is required to be done under the statute. I'll come to that slide little later. I have put one slide on that itself. I'll discuss that little more detail when it comes. Now, there should be an existence of a goods or services or a combination of goods or services. Again, what is goods? It's defined. What is services? Defined. The more debatable issue as far as the definitions are concerned, it's a services. Among many other things, the service definition essentially says service means anything other than goods. Now, the question which arises is, when the definition of services says anything other than goods, and a similar definition is there in the Constitution, do we have to understand this meaning or the definition as full and final to say it is not covering any, it's going to cover any transaction under the sun, any activities under the sun, irrespective of the common understanding of the phrase service, or it should be confined only to the common understanding of the definition of a service? We will get the answer to this in the days to come only when the judicial forums, especially the higher forum like Supreme Court, handles it, deals it, because presently there are divergent views on it, especially when it comes to the taxation of immovable properties. When I go and explain about the supply, we'll deal with it, that how and to what extent whether immovable property is covered or not covered, we'll have a debate on that later. But for the time being, the understanding is goods and services, whether services means anything, then if that was the intention, why was there a necessity of a definition of a service? But have simply said all the transactions and activities are liable to tax as a services other than goods. So to what extent we can go is something which is a question which requires addressal later. Now the taxing statute also talks about the levy section, the value on which the tax is supposed to be levied is to be determined in terms of section 15 of the CGST Act. Now, again, there are a lot of debates on the valuation. Maybe those will be dealt in the session which handles valuation. Next, the rates. The tax will be levied at such rates as will be notified by the government on the recommendation of the council. When I'm talking about government, if it's a central GST, it is a central government. If it's a state GST, it is a respective state government through a notification supposed to set out the rates. Now, when I talk about these rates to be notified, it is the GST council which is going to make a recommendation. Based on that, the government is going to come and issue a notification. It is not enough that only one of those two issues a notification. Both has to issue a notification parallelly to give effect to the rate of taxes. We have been understanding under the GST regime that the rate of tax for the goods is governed by the classification given under the first schedule of the Customs Tariff Act. But is there a reference to that in any of the provisions of the Act? Answer is no. It is the notification under which that particular rates have been notified. That notification itself give a reference as to the reference to the Customs Tariff Act schedule and how it has to be interpreted, what way we have to look at it. All these aspects are set out in that notification itself. Now the next question which comes in is, if they are referring to the first schedule of the Customs Tariff Act, then is the classification more important before we determine the rate of tax, or it is having a mere reference value only? If we refer to the notifications 1 of 2019 or corresponding to that similarly state notifications, we can see that the notifications which are issued are governed by the respective table where there is a reference to the classification. Now, when it comes to the services, again there is a reference to a particular HS reference, but actually it is the earlier we were calling this SAC. Later on, we adopted the code which was being adopted by UN for its statistical purposes. We adopt the same thing for the purpose of identifying or grouping a classification services into certain groups. Why I'm talking about this is, now when we are talking about rates, I can nomenclate whatever the rates notified by the government through a notification as a notified rate. Then there may be certain exemptions issued under section 11 of CGST Act. After giving effect to the exemption, what comes out is an effective rate. So notified rate and effective rate are different. Now many a times there may be a mismatch between the description vis-a-vis a classification. So there are a lot of challenges when it comes. Unlike an exemption notification, we could have read down to say, though it is not at all there, we may construe this. But for charging the tax, it is essential that the rate should be notified. If no rate is notified, then that is not at all leviable to tax. In fact, under the services, more specifically, the notification 11 of 2017 deals with various rates of tax notified as the recommendation from the council. Now, there are certain services which at least I could look at, which do not fit into the descriptions given over there. Now, there was again a sort of a guidance note which was there used by the UN. It is published by CBIC also for a ease of reference when we are interpreting that. Unlike in a goods, I can't say there is a residuary provision under the service notification, the notification for services. So there is a chance that there may be some activity, though you may construe it to be a supply of services, but you may find that there is no rate of tax for it, and effectively you may escape. Again, it may lead to litigation, no doubt, but there is a possibility to do that. Again, one more debate which is there on many of the entries in this rate notifications, especially services, it comes out with the conditions that no input tax credit is availed. The question which comes in is, what if I avail input tax? Can it be construed as one of the entry? And if I do not fall into that entry, and if I avail and no other entry is covering me, am I not liable to tax at all? Or would I fall into a general rate of tax if I fall into that general description? Is something which we can examine at appropriate cases. Once there's a rate, the collection is as per the manner prescribed. Essentially, the rules will guide how the taxes would be collected by the authorities. Now, when I talked about 918, it was relating to CGST. Similarly, IGST also has a similar provision, whereas instead of intrastate, it is interstate. That is the only difference which we can make out over there. However, there is a provision to section 5.1 which is interesting. It says import and export of goods or services. Basically, in the constitution itself, it says where there's an import or export of goods or services, then it is construed as in the nature of interstate supply. Now, when it comes to leviability of a GST on goods, I'm not talking about services, goods. The proviso to 5.1 says IGST is levied and collected in accordance with the provisions of Section 3 of the Customs Tariff Act. Section 3 of the Customs Tariff Act provides for imposition of additional duties of customs equal to the GST leviable on such goods. Similarly, here, though there is a mention of the same in Section 3 of the Customs Tariff Act, here there is a proviso in 5.1 which refers that the GST on import of goods will be levied and collected in accordance with the provisions of Section 3 of the Act. So, can it be construed that it is a parallel levy, or it foregoes and only empowers that if what is to be collected, you collect under that act. You don't have to collect separately under this act. Again, when it comes to value in such cases, it says whatever the value is determined for the purpose of customs under the Customs Act, the same would be applicable over there. And more interestingly, it also says the point of collection of IGST on import of goods is synchronized with the point of levy of the customs duty under the Customs Act on import of goods. So they're synced. So whenever you pay the customs duty on the import of goods, at the same time, when it's leviable, at the same time when IGST is leviable, and at the same time it is supposed to be paid along with the customs duty. So this is how it is designed. Though there are some constitutional challenges on this aspect of it, still lot of deliberation is yet to happen on the same. Now, as I was mentioning, if I have to put a stepwise action, how do we start and where do we go, or how do we look at? Because you said there are multiple statutes, multiple aspects, but how do we start? From where do we start and how do we proceed further? At least I have listed out this. This is what I could consider. Firstly, one has to understand whether there is a transaction or activity is supply. The scope of supply is defined in section 7 of CGST Act, similarly SGST Act. Then if the transaction is supply, whether it is a supply of a goods or services, because supply includes goods or service or both, but when we are coming into the taxation, we need to divide or other group that transaction or activity either into supply of a goods or supply of services. This is where at least I think there is a little of a challenge, because Rupa madam in the next session may talk about the composite supply, mixed supply concept. Whether the principles set out therein in section 8 is confined for only determining the tax rate or even determining the nature of supply, whether it's a supply of goods or supply of services. Though impliedly we are all following the same principles, but technically if we see, I see that may not be applicable. Especially take an example, if there is a supply of a goods and supply of a services, and both happens to be a mixed supply as per those principles. Now, and the rate of tax applicable for both are say 18%. Then how do you treat the transaction as, whether it is a supply of a goods or supply of services? Deciding whether it's a supply of a goods or supply of services, I cannot proceed further because the principles or the rules for determining the location of the supplier or the place of supply is dependent upon the fact whether the supply is that of a goods or supply is of service. If we have not freezed out that the supply is goods or supply is service, then it may be difficult for us to move forward. So this is where I think there is a bottleneck which requires an addressal by the Parliament and the legislature to bring in or making a separate set of provisions to say or determine how to define, how to determine whether supply is of a goods or services, in addition to whatever has been set out in Schedule 2. Schedule 2 doesn't cover everything. Schedule 2 cover only some of the transactions, but it does not cover all the transactions or all the type of transaction and all the genre of transactions. So therefore, it becomes important that there should have been a residuary provision in Schedule 2 if they define. Maybe that will be coming out handy for anybody to decide whether the nature of supply is a supply of goods or supply of services. Now, once we proceed with the presumption that we are able to decide in any given transaction it is in the nature of supply of goods a supply of services, then one has to determine the location of the supplier, then the place of supply. Based on that location of the supplier and the place of supply, we have to determine whether it is an intrastate supply or interstate supply. Having determined the supply is in the nature of interstate supply or intrastate supply, then we are supposed to take up the applicable statutory provision, that is IGST Act or CGST along with SGST Act, or if it is a Union Territory, UTGST Act. Now, having zeroed on the applicable act, then we have to refer to the respective notifications issued under that statute, under the IGST Act or the CGST Act. Make reference to that notification. It may not make much difference because more or less the entries or the descriptions are same. However, on technicalities, if somebody has proceeded to levy and collect from the authority side the IGST, and if the transaction is covered under CGST, SGST, then the entire proceedings may take a U-turn completely. So that may have a different repercussion altogether. So that is how I was trying to say we need to zero down on the act which we need to apply. Next, classify. Here the classify is different from the grouping of goods and services. Here we have to classify that goods or services as to the rate of tax applicability and also the corresponding exemptions or concessions if any available. Then based on the classification, we are supposed to identify the rate of tax and exemption. So I think this is what I can put it in a one sequence, step by step, what we can adopt to proceed or do a check as to a particular transaction up to the determination of a applicable tax on that particular transaction. Now I think I can move on to the supply, understanding the term supply. Here, the first question I would ask, why the definition of supply is not in the definition section? And also in section 7, they don't say definition of supply. The heading or the title to section 7 says scope of supply. So to my mind, it goes to say that it is not a definition, but wherever we are using the word supply in this act, it includes this. I'll read the relevant portion very slowly. Supply includes. Here includes, does it mean that supply includes, is it exhaustive or it is inclusive where other than this something else also is covered? Here I am of the view that when it's using the word includes and there are certain requirements for somebody to call a supply, you cannot read this word includes to be inclusive to something which we understand supply in general. Nevertheless, we leave that there and proceed further. Supply includes all forms of supply. Now, I want to go back to the definition of I want to go to the charging section where it is talking about a tax being levied on supply of goods or services or both. Now, I'll come back. when it is using the word supply in the charging section, should we construe the term supply over there as a verb or as a noun? If we are construing the term in the charging section as supply as a verb, which means an action of giving something to other person is supply. So supplying, that means the nouns are already there. Goods, service are both. There the supply is coming out to be in the form of verb. So an action of the supply is what is defined there. And further to that, that is where it is not coming as a definition. Here it is talking about the scope of supply. So we have to understand the meaning of the term supply in this context. And here it is using the word forms of supply. It is not defining supply. It is only saying forms of supply. So forms of action, different forms of an action which is carried out in respect of a goods or service or both. And there is a enumerations given over here. That is sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal. Now, when I'm talking about a forms of supply as a sort of a verb over here, a sale, again, we are not getting into the sale definition over here as a noun to cover some other statute, bring in some other statute and adopt over here. We are using the term sale as an action, a transfer as an action, barter as an action, exchange as an action, license as an action, rental as an action, lease as an action, or a disposal as an action. Now, this all 8 forms of supply, when we are talking about preceded by the word such as, these are merely example, because, and if I can look at it carefully, all these can be linked to essentially a goods. Sale cannot be of services, transfer cannot be of services, barter can be of with services, but since all other things are essentially relating to the goods, we can construe this also for the time as a goods. Exchange can be of services, but let's move it. License, activity of licensing may be service, but action of license is for goods. There cannot be license for service. It's a license for goods, rental of goods, lease of goods, disposal of goods. Now, if we see, there is nothing connected to services specifically, where we generally use the word provision of service. So this supplied all forms when they are saying, in addition to this, it also may include provision of service, though not specifically covered. So this is how we can read that, because it is preceded the word such as, and the sale, transfer, barter, exchange is merely sort of an example, and there may be a overlapping between many of these things. And the next question which comes up is whether what is defined in this portion should in the same way be used in some other aspect, especially if we refer to third schedule. It uses about only a sale of land. It does not use any other forms over here. Does that mean that that is only restricted to one forms of supply of the land, not others? So in my personal view, it is, we cannot confine that only to that limited sense. Now, further, there is this supply of goods or services made or agreed to be made for a consideration. So consideration is must, supply is must, and that supply should happen in the course of furtherance of business. Again, the business definition is, I'll come to the definition of business a little later. Now the next one is import of service for a consideration, whether or not in the course of furtherance of business. Now, each of these clause, are they independent? Obviously independent, because if we see B, it also has consideration. It also has got a in the course of furtherance of business. But if we read clause A and clause B harmoniously, clause B is a reverse action, whereas in clause A, it is a forward action, what is subjected to tax. In fact, there can be a question. It is from whose context we have to see the supply. It is always from the supplier's perspective. We need to see the meaning and scope of supply. But that is where separately a charging section as through a proviso is added in section 5.1, and for services there's a separate clause being added in the supply to specifically cover import of services. In fact, in the service tax regime, in the absence of provisions of section 66A, there were a judicial precedents which said until the introduction of section 66A, there could not have been a levy of service tax on reverse charge basis on import of services. If we go by that thing, maybe here also there's a specific clause in supply, scope of supply, which says import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course of furtherance of business. So is being subjected to supply as a GST, applicability of a GST or the same. Now, when it comes to the activity specified schedule, made or agreed to be made without consideration. If we refer to this clause, there is no reference of in the course of furtherance of business over here. However, if we refer to the entries in the clause of each of the clauses in the schedule, there is a specific mention of in the course of business either by implication or specifically over there. So there also in the course of furtherance of business can be implied to be an essential condition even for the activities which are specified in schedule 1. If I had to give a pictorial representation of the thing, there are 3 groupings. One is the actual supply, a second from the liability of a recipient perspective for services created over here. Similarly, in case of 5.1 provisos will come into picture and add in this particular group. Then when it comes to without consideration as a special cases, in schedule 1 it covers permanent transfer or disposal of business assets. So once it is talking about business assets, so it should be obviously in the course of the business itself. Then second one, it talks about between the person and between the distinct person in the course of furtherance of business, our exclusion for gift up to the employees up to 50,000. Then again, agent and principal on behalf of each other. Here, though there is no specific mention about in the course of business, agency and principals are generally undertaken in the course of business. So that is implied, which I was mentioning. And third one, import of services from a related person or any other establishment outside the course of business. So here also it requires that it should be in the course of business. Though clause B did not doesn't require in the course of furtherance of business, but there's a consideration. Whereas here there is a requirement it should be in the course of business, though not with the consideration. This is as far as schedule 1 is concerned. I think when it comes to the business, clause A is very, very important. Business includes, because anyhow it is inclusive. The general understanding of business is with profit motive, but here it is saying any trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, vacation, adventure, wager, or any other similar activity, whether or not for a pecuniary benefit. Here, when we are talking about trade, the term trade itself is generally for the purpose of objective of a profit. But here
I think there is some connection issue. We are trying to reconnect. Sir, I think your mic is on mute. You can disable your video and enable only audio. There appears to be some connection problem.
okay, is it audible now?
Yeah, you can disable your video, sir. I think there could be some connectivity issues. You need to share the screen.
Okay, visible? Okay.
No, just a second. This shared screen, you need to click to share the PDF, PPT. Yes, now it's fine.
Yeah, okay, fine. I think I was just referring to the term, the trade, business, commerce, manufacture. There's an inbuilt meaning for each of this embedded with a profit motive. Now, here it is talking about whether or not it's for a pecuniary benefit. Now, Ashish, is it audible? Clear? I think something needs to be
Yeah,
recorded.
it is
Recorded, I think something requires recording. I think it's already recording. Okay, fine. All these elements generally, when we see, it is carried out with a profit motive. Now, when it's talking about whether or not pecuniary benefit, one of the interpretations being placed is that the pecuniary benefit for the transaction or as a objective as a whole. That again requires a lot of debate. For the time being, we say it's in the normal course and with certain regularity being there as far as the trade, commerce, manufacture, profession, vocation is concerned. Now that means a trade is being done regularly in the as an objective and being carried out. Now we go to clause B. Any activity or a transaction in connection with or incidental ancillary to subclause A. Now there is a main course of a trade or commerce. Then there's an activity connected to that main activity is also considered to be a business. C, any transaction or transaction nature of subclause A, which whether or not there's a volume, frequency, continuity, or regularity of such transaction. Again, if you see clause C, it is not independent of clause A. First of all, we have to answer to the first condition that it is a trade. Only if there is a trade, this continuity, volume, frequency will come into picture. If it is not at all a trade in my general practice, then can a transaction which is in the nature of trade and commerce can be construed as a whether continuity volume. So first of all, I start a activity of a whatever manufacture, but I manufacture yearly only once. So that volume and frequency will not be looked into because I am manufacturing. Now, this again will go on to the debate as to the religious bodies selling or engaged in propagating their religion through the sale of CDs, books, etc. The primary objective is to propagate their religion, not a trade or commerce. So when or a profession. So my propagation of religion, when it is not falling into A, the sale of the book Whether it falls into clause C and gets attracted, I think again divergent view. My view is that it will not fall into clause C and will be outside the scope of definition of business. Similarly, supplier acquisition of goods, including capital goods. So rest of the things I will not go into. I will only cover important thing. Then it comes to provision by a club, association, society, or any such body. Here, the main challenge which is going to come is the Calcutta Club decision of Supreme Court, which recently ruled, interpreted the provisions of the service tax law. When it interpreted the provisions of service tax law, the amended service tax law after the negative list, it said, no doubt in one portion it includes the club, association, etc. But in this definition of a service, it is not expanded. Similarly, here, the definition of business would not suffice in my view, since the distinct person definition do not cover this aspect. If the clause E over here was coming out in the similar to the person definition, I think probably we would have had a better chance in the GST, where similarly when they were examining, the person definition included both, but the service definition did not cover both. So that is what was the ruling. Applying the same rationale, there's a chance that this matter also may go to the Supreme Court or the higher forums on this context, unless there's a amendment to the law in this effect. I think I will not get into other aspects of it. I'll move on to the next slide. Recently, there was a retrospective amendment which was carried out in the last year, in fact, wherein 7.1 clause D, where it had covered whatever the activity schedule in schedule 2 as a part of the scope of supply definition. It's, I mean, the clause 1. But later on, they realized there's some lacuna over there. So retrospectively, they have pushed that clause D to separate subclause as 7.1a, and at the same time, it says this is only for the purpose of determining whether supply is that of a supply of goods or supply of services, and it is not to determine whether it's a supply or not. So therefore, it is essential for one to first fulfill the conditions of supply as to the nature, I mean, supply, then there's a form of supply, then the valuation, the consideration, and in the course and furtherance of business. Now in schedule 2, broadly I have listed out the headings given. I think in the next session, in the course of defining composite supply, mixed supply, classifying the goods or services, I think in detail these have been discussed. So I'm not going to go into each of these elements. Only one question I would like to correlate what I was just trying to say in the sequence of determining the taxability. Whether once there is a heading, land and building, and if I carefully go through the entries relating to land and building, it is not covering other than mere, lease, license, etc. The other types of transfers not being a sale, like, joint development, transfer of developmental right, those things have not been envisaged in this heading in schedule 2. If the intention of this statute was to cover, having defined so many aspects relating to land and building, I mean many aspects related to land and building, if they had to tax it, they would have put in over there relating to even the developmental right as well. but we don't find that concept of developmental rights being added in Schedule 2 to constitute as a service. It also gives an other thing. When they're talking about land and building, it is not covering any transaction relating to the subject matter of a land and building. It's only the usage of the land and building and not the core subject itself. The transfer of it is dealt, which also gives an indication that the service definition per se or the scope of service may not include the transfer or the movement of the title or the land in itself. So I think this is what I can draw implied presumption from interpreting the entry 2 to Schedule 2 to that effect. Now, section 7 subsection 2 gives an exclusion. Now there is a specific mention there, the activities or transactions. We saw that forms of supply, but whereas here we are using about activities and transactions. So activities or transaction which are listed out in third schedule is not a supply, and the notified activities or transactions which are undertaken by the government or local authority as a public authorities, then also those will be outside the scope of supply. So if we see the entries in the third schedule, the first entry talks about services by the employee to employer in the course of or in relation to his employment. In fact, a couple of days back, the advanced ruling on director remuneration is moving around, and a lot of comments that how can there be such advanced ruling that the remuneration paid to the directors is liable for tax under RCM. So I think these things go on. Actually, there's a clear-cut thing. Once there's an employer-employee relationship, there cannot be a GST on the same. Once there is no levy at all, the question of making somebody else liable to pay tax would not be there. Now coming into the other aspects, I will not go into detail. This employer-employee is concerned, whether is it necessary, I'm just posing a question, whether is it necessary that the employee should be always an individual or the natural person, or it can also be that a artificial juridical person can also be an employee. I think it's a matter of a debate again. If I engage some firm to do all the work through its employees, whether that firm can be said to be an employee or not, it's again a debatable issue, but I'm just putting across the set point for everybody's consideration. Again, in this, I'm going to cover only the last but one entry, which is dealing with sale of land, subject to clause B of paragraph 5 of Schedule 2, sale of building. It is nothing but sale of land and sale of building. Now the question which is bothering many of the people in the real estate sector is whether the term sale is to be construed as pure sale only. The reason is because the supply definition in 7.1 covers different forms: sale, transfer, barter, exchange. Now, since in one place of the statute there is a different word which is separately used, and in other place when it is not so used, would it mean that the scope of this entry is only confined to one form of supply of land, that is a sale only. All other forms like transfer or barter or exchange will it not be covered under this exclusion and be liable to tax. First of all, the primary question which is unanswered as of now is whether the immovable property transaction can it be subject matter of a GST. In my view, considering the overall sequence of events and various reports of different commission which were formed to study GST and make a recommendation, the purpose and intention of introducing the GST law was to consolidate the taxes on goods and services and never to consolidate the taxes on the transaction of immovable properties. That being the case, how do we read the scope and the term services defined in Constitution and also in the definition given in this statute? If we refer back to the interpretation of Article 366(29)(a) as to the works contract, Honorable Supreme Court relied upon the Commission's reports which were laid before the Parliament for the modification amendment to the Constitution. Similarly, I am of the view that even in this case, to understand the meaning and scope of levy of GST, there may be a reference to those reports, and based on which they may come to a conclusion whether the scope of levy of GST will attract the transaction of immovable property or not. Now, one more issue which is bothering presently is leviability of a GST on this developmental rights. Obviously, developmental rights on the prima facie reading, discarding the discussion which I had sometime, little while ago, is mentioned. So thereby, development right is liable for tax. Let's assume and proceed further. If we proceed further on the presumption that developmental rights is subject matter of a levy of a GST. Now, if we see whether there is a notified rate for the same, the classification which is given 5572, it actually deals with real estate services. And again, if we see that whatever the explanatory notes, it talks about what various activities are covered under that particular classification. I couldn't find in any way the transfer of developmental right in that particular classification. Now, there is a, and again, if you see, there's no specific entry mentioning developmental right in notification number 11 of 2017. However, there is a mention of that for the same heading in notification number 12 of 2017. I invite your kind attention to the opening paragraph of notification 12 of 17 as compared with 11 of 2017. The 12 of 17, there is no reference of a classification for the determining the exemption. It only says description. Whereas charging section requires that it should be classified into that particular service category. Now, that means it's only a reference value in 12, but whereas requirement in 11. Once there is an UK, and also Honorable Supreme Court in case of State of Kerala versus L&T, where it was dealing with the works contract, clearly said, when there is no levy, you cannot interpret a levy provision through an exemption notification. So similarly here, by the fact that they have placed an entry in exemption notification 12 of 17 under 9972 cannot be presumed that it is liable to tax under entry 9972 in notification 11 of 17. So you can just go through these entries and see. In my reading, I could not find that it is liable to be taxed, assuming all other aspects there's any tax. One more important aspect, since I'm talking about this developmental right. In a joint development agreement, again, you cannot generalize all the transaction. You have to go through each and every joint development agreement, the terms and conditions arranged and agreed over there. Each can change the scenarios. In general, as I was just mentioning about the fact that this developmental right is a concept where if somebody transfers the developmental right, when I am entering a joint development agreement along with the being a landowner with the developer, do I give a developmental right, or do I only permit him to use the developmental right for a joint benefit of the project? I do not give away or transfer the developmental right. So therefore, the primary understanding that there is a transfer of developmental right in a joint development itself is flawed in my understanding. Next question, next aspect, even assuming for a moment there is a transfer of developmental rights, whether the value which is there, whether the value is constituting or including the transfer of title to land, because whatever the value agreed in the form of the construction portion is not only for the developmental right, it is a bundle of rights where this developmental right, if any, being transferred is a precedent to the effective final transfer of title to the land itself. So that being the case, how can there be a presumption that the entire value which I get is for the transfer of this developmental right? I think there is a clear-cut lacuna in that understanding. Consequently, all those notifications which has been issued in the real estate sector is not proper in my understanding. So I think with this particular discussion, I can close some of the discussions on the supply. And third schedule, there is one more amendment which came in 2019, which talks about where supply happens from one territory outside the country to another territory outside the country, but on my account. So whether it is subjected to GST, they have clearly brought out, no, it's not subject to GST. Similarly, where the goods are being imported before clearance, if some supply happens, at the same time, if supply happens through high sea sale, no tax on the same. So those are made very clear in the third schedule of the CGST Act. I think I am able to complete the assigned topic for me in the given time. Now I think the questions, if any, are there. I think Ashish will take out and speak about it, and can give my inputs on the same.
Yes, sir. So the first question is, there are numerous questions. What we will see, whatever questions can be answered in next 15 minutes, those questions we will cover in the course of this discussion. If it is not possible to answer all the questions, we will address those questions separately. Also, there could be some question where some more research may be required to give final answers. So those questions also we can address separately. So the first question is, can the definition of supply be challenged considering it is an inclusive definition?
Okay. You can challenge any provisions of the Act if you are able to establish that it is not in accordance with the power to levy tax under the Constitution. Now, something what you may consider as unreasonable may be reasonable unless the purpose and objectives of the constitutions are met. As I was trying to explain in the given thing, inclusive definition. This is where I said they may not strike down the provision, they may read down the provision. They may interpret the provision of supply to cover certain things. They may not say it is not at all, proper. So my understanding is the courts may read down the scope of the term supply given over there and will not strike down the definition. Next,
Okay.
Ashish.
So there is a question on intermediary, which I think would be taken in the place of supply provision.
Yes, yes.
Next question is whether GST is payable on liquidated damage normally agreed with the vendors for short supply or delayed supply and deducted from the running bills is liable to GST, specifically after amendment in the definition of supply by deleting clause 7(1)(d). So the
Okay.
question is whether liquidated damage are liable to GST.
Liquidated damages is, if I have to look at the transaction of a liquidated damages, there are two basic understanding one should have. Whether this liquidated damages is originating from the original supply contract or agreement, and if it is yes, now this whatever the liquidated damages, is it a separate independent supply than the original supply, or it is merely altering the value agreed in a certain contingent event. In other words, if I do this, my value is this. If I don't do this, my value is this. So it is altering the value, or it is a separate independent supply. In my understanding, it cannot be an independent supply because it is a part of the same original supply, and one transaction, it cannot be split because the understanding of the parties is not to act as a recipient to act as a supplier and a supplier to act as a recipient in the case of an event which is agreed over there. So in my understanding, it is not fulfilling the definition of a supply. Once it is not a supply, getting into the schedule 2 to determine the tax, this is made very clear in 7(1)(a) to say only if 7(1) is fulfilled, then only the classification of a supply will come in schedule 2.
So you mean to say it is adjustment to the original consideration, it is not a separate supply.
Yes. And again, whether you are entitled to adjust the GST paid is again subjected to 34, but that does as a nature of transaction is concerned, it cannot be considered as an independent separate transaction altogether.
Okay.
You cannot place a recipient into the shoes of a supplier. There is no such understanding whatsoever in that liquidated damages. The person of recipient will for this GST to be called as supplier or recipient, the contract or the understanding of the parties is essential. It cannot be in vacuum. It cannot be assumed. It has to be through contract agreements, unless law comes out and specifically says. So here is a situation where my agreement or my contract or my understanding of the parties is to act as a supplier, not as a recipient. At the same time, act from the other side, act as a recipient, not as a supplier. How can there be a tax on the liquidated damages? This is what is my answer.
Yes. So sir, the next question is whether schedule 1 is independent of the scope of supply. That means, for example, goods are given to employee for the exhibition purpose. Whether the activity of giving goods per se to the employee would be said to be supply, as it is without consideration, though there is no supply element involved. So the question is whether only those activities can be covered in the schedule 1 which are inherently fulfilling the supply, or any activity of giving goods to employee etc. would fall into schedule 1 and would attract supply levy.
Okay. Exactly. Here, as I was just trying to explain section on the screen, if I would like to put the definition. In fact, I did mention whether clause A, clause B, clause C are dependent or independent of each other. I mentioned that each of these clauses are independent because the elements are specifically separately defined over there. In fact, I did also mention, if you see clause C, there is no mention of in the course or furtherance of business in the text of 7.1c. Whereas if we see the entries in 7.1, there the business aspects are inbuilt. Again, when it comes to supply between the person and between in the course or furtherance of business, again, to be considered as a supply, as per the general understanding, there should be a supplier and recipient, and understanding of a supply of certain thing as a supplier and a recipient. Now, this employer and employee related transactions, where the same example which I gave for a liquidated damages, I can adopt the similar provision here, where as a part of an employment, if something is being given, then it is a part of the original supply being given in a different form. Correct? So whether it is the consideration which is being given in the non-monetary form can be treated as a supply, an independent supply. So there is a possibility, depending upon the circumstance of each case, to construe that to be independent supply if it is a goods. I'm giving a goods to the employee in case of a instead of a services. Now your question is, now I've given a certain goods to the employees, whether it is treated as supply in all circumstances. If it is gratuitous and not in the course of business, not for the purpose of business, merely I, as a will I give it, there is a possibility to take an argument that it cannot be treated as a supply because it is not in the course or furtherance of business. This word furtherance, again, to what extent we have to see is subject matter for debate. In your example, I am having a feeling that in the days to come, this will be dealt very rigorously, and it will be read down to say only if it is for the transaction which is having a business flavor only will get attracted, not otherwise.
So, sir, I would just supplement to what you have explained. So, if you look at the entry number 2 of the schedule 1, it says supply between distinct person or the related party in the course or furtherance of business. So, while defining the supply in schedule 1, they are itself in this entry, they are starting with the supply. So when I'm giving any goods to the employee, where employee is only carrying those goods from my place of business to the exhibition center for the purpose of display in the exhibition, it is mere handing over of the goods to the employee, where he will be transporting it from one location to another. And because that mere handing over cannot be said to be supply.
Sorry, I got your question wrong. Sorry. If that particular thing, it is not at all a supply to him. It is not for his individual. See, when it is he is not a recipient of that goods. He is merely a bailee of that goods.
Yes.
Okay. Merely being a bailee cannot be treated as supply.
Yes.
Because the supply means it should be for the final enjoyment of that other person, where I lose and other person gets it. Supply means it should go away from me and should reach to other person in totality, not as a temporary thing.
Yes. So we can move to the next question, sir.
Yeah.
There is a school which is having hostel with kitchen, and it has the object of under section 12W of Income Tax Act to give relief to the poor. Now, because of lockdown, it is providing free food to many poor, and the trust is getting donation from various people, and the amount of donation is more than 20 lakh. So the question is in the context of definition of consideration, which says that money could be paid by the recipient or it may be paid by any other person. So could it be said that the amount received by the trust from the person who are giving donation would fall in the definition of consideration, and there would be GST implications?
See, always a taxability is seen qua a supply, a qua transaction, not generalized thing. Okay. If you use our donation, I give 50,000 rupees, say that you can serve to any people, or you are doing you are serving a food to poor and donating, or you publish that I am trying to donate, anybody is interested can donate. So there is no reverse obligation from me to give an account that as per his direction I'm supplying to so and so, so and so, so and so. So there is no direct correlation. I'm specifically using a direct correlation between your action vis-a-vis a consideration. If there is the one which you told, consideration received from some other party, would be a situation where I give AMC services to the customer, but I get paid by the the manufacturer, OE manufacturer. So I think that is what is envisaged, not these type of thing. You cannot link anything and everything indirectly. So it should be having a direct nexus. Here, there's no direct nexus, so no supply.
So here basically there is no quid pro quo in terms of the person who is giving donation vis-a-vis he getting any benefit.
Yes.
So this next question is, we are taking only the question related to supply. There are other questions on the RCM or composite supply. All those would be taken over in the respective sessions. So
Okay.
the question is, what if a rate notification is issued only by the central government but not issued by the state government? Do we require to charge SGST in such a case?
I think there is one provision I'm not able to refer to the book. There is some relaxation to that effect that it can be notified later or something. But nevertheless, they are going to notify with retrospective effect, backdated notification by the states. They will be there. It will be there, but backdated or retrospective.
So, sir, the next question is, the location of supplier of goods has not been defined in the
Ashish,
CGST.
your audio is low.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah,
So the
now.
question is, the location of supplier of goods has not been defined in the CGST Act. Would that make any impact on the transaction of goods?
No, it doesn't make. If something is not defined, we understand it generally.
Okay, so the next question is, I am a trader and I have imported certain goods and I am recovering the import duty from the customer through a separate debit note. Now, whether this recovering the custom duty from the customer would be considered as a supply or not?
No, it is a valuation issue, no?
Yes, I think it is more of a valuation issue. So where the value of custom duty shall also be included in the value of original supply. So the next question is, being a destination based consumption tax, whether any service which is consumed abroad, say courier services provided by Indian Courier Agency, be taxed under IGST in terms of section 7 subsection 5 clause A of the IGST Act, isn't this ultra virus?
In fact, I did mention that I refer to the article also, wherein it clearly says any law made by the parliament shall not be held to be invalid for being an extraterritorial jurisdiction. So it cannot be held as extraterritorial jurisdiction. So they can deem certain things happening outside the country also as happening in the country when they have a subject matter of the tax is located in India. That is, the person who is liable to pay is located in India. They can link that and collect taxes. It will not be beyond the scope.
Okay. The next question is, what is the relevance in case of this requirement of furtherance of business in case of import of goods? So if I'm importing any goods which are not in the course
No,
of furtherance of business.
there is no requirement at all. That is where I said, like scope of supply in 7(1)(b) talk.
Hello?
I think I missed. Ashish, now audible?
Yeah, now audible. So, sir, the question is in the IGST Act concerned where the levy is on the import of goods, whether the test of
Correct.
business has to be satisfied there also.
That's exactly. I'm coming to the same thing. Okay. If you see 7(1)(b), there is a mention about it of a taxing it of whether in the course of furtherance of business one, whereas in the proviso it is treating an import as a taxable event. If you see, supply is not being considered over there. It is import itself is treated as a supply. So the scope of tax is expanded to link to or coincide with the supply linked to the import. Now, even if you are importing your own goods from abroad, which has gone earlier being returned back, then you export it, it is being sent back. There is no other person. It is your own goods coming back. Still, you may be liable to pay IGST on the transaction by virtue of the proviso, though there is no another supplier, because it is levied and collected on any import. Import is considered the goods coming into India. It is not only supply in the course of import or export, it's the import itself. 5(1), if I have to see, 1 minute. Okay. As far as import, Ashish, you have a proviso to 5(1), you can just refer. I do not have a reference over here. If it is talking about import, so then it will be taxable on import under section 3. So all the provisions section 3 will get attracted, irrespective of the fact that the other conditions are fulfilled or not. Okay, next questions you can take, Ashish.
Yeah. So next question is whether insurance claim are covered in the actionable claim, and if yes, then how the collection made from the insurance company should be taxed to GST.
I think it requires a lot of deliberation. I think we can skip. You can send a separately answer to that. I think one article also we have done. I think Ashish, you can just share that.
Yes. So I think today's this meeting time is over. So whatever open questions are there, those open questions we will answer either in a separate session wherein we'll answer all the question after this series, or we will separately email the answer of the question to the participants. Thank you, sir, for your wonderful session and discussing the various important aspect of the supply. And I would also like to thank all the participants on behalf of Hiregang Academy to join for this discussion, and we hope everyone would have got I would say have got more enriched with the subject knowledge. Now sir, if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I would like to thank Academy for giving me this opportunity. I would like to thank all the participants for having participated, and also I was seeing a lot of questions which have been posed, so that shows that the subject which I am handling is having still a lot of issues to be addressed. At the same time, I would like to thank Ashish for coordinating, and also I should thank Arjun at the back end who is supporting for this webinar for my presentation. Thank you one and all. Have a good day. Whatever you can do in the lockdown, do, but stay at home. Thank you. Thank you one and all.
Yeah, one more request from all the participants. At the end, when you log out, there is a feedback form. You can certainly give your feedback to make more improvement by us in the entire webinar series. Thank you very much.